Thank you for joining this ACRL Access Services Interest Group 2020 Spring Virtual Forum. I'm Sue Garrison, Access Services Manager from Rice University, and joining me on monitoring our chat window today is Connie Wade, Circulation and User Services Librarian from the University of Iowa. The Access Services Interest Group is looking for interested members to fill key positions that create and promote webinars just like this one. And at the end of this webinar, we'll post a survey link in your chat window. Please consider stepping up to volunteer with ASIG. Please also note that this is a safe environment and whatever is shared with the group will be kept anonymous, and we would hope that all participants will respect these rules and not share out information from this session. Today's session focuses on how libraries can proactively hire, support, and retain diverse teams. And we are very pleased to have Susan O'Halloran with us today, who has taught on this topic around the country for more than 50 years. Sue is author of 7 books, several films, has appeared on national television, has been interviewed as a subject matter expert by the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the Chicago Tribune, produces and delivers diversity and inclusion programming across the U.S., and is key principal of the websites racebridgesstudio.com and susanohalloran.com. Sue, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Susan Garrison. We decided as we were preparing this, since we both call each other Sue, we'd be Sue G and Sue O. So thank you, Sue G. And thank you to the Association of College and Research Libraries, and of course, the Access Services Interest Group. I'm so pleased to be with you. And if you have been trying, and I know many of you have, to get a more diverse staff, but you feel a little frustrated, you've come to the right place. We're going to see if we can't think a little bit outside the box today and do an even better job for this important task all of us are trying to do nowadays. So let me see if I can get my technology on right, and we will be sharing my screen. So here we go. And I'm going to assume we can check chat that everybody's going to be able to see. Huh. Did that work? Yes, I think, are you all seeing the screen? Yes, yes, and yes. Okay, so I just need to get it a little bit larger for you all. Oh, slow slideshow, there we go. Okay, so hiring diverse talent and rolling out the welcome mat. You've come to the right place if you want to know why diverse staffing matters. I'm figuring if most of you are on this call, you already know, but we'll go over that. Also, why is it so dang hard to accomplish? How might we be going about it in a less than productive way? And also, tips for creating the requirements for opening up your staffing needs. Suggestions for breaking out of the box when it comes to recruiting. I'm going to give you a selection model that I think is going to help open things up for you, and some things you need to have in place to retain the folks you've worked so hard to find and select. Now, today I'm going to have a strong focus for you on race and ethnicity, but this can apply to any of the diversity elements that we're going to be looking at today. First, let me tell you just a little bit about myself. Besides the kind of credentials that Susan Garrison gave us. I wanted to just let you know, there I am, huh? I grew up in an all-white neighborhood on the southwest side of Chicago. And on the southwest side of Chicago, we had our own Mason-Dixon line, and Mason was Irish and Dixon was Black. There was no crossing that line. My parents, my grandparents, their idea of interracial dating was when I dated Jim Warpinski, a Polish boy. Now in high school, I got involved in a civil rights group. I was really lucky. Dr. King was living in Chicago, and the adults who worked with us worked with him. So we got terrific training in leading seminars. That's why Sue could say that I've been doing this for 50 years. I started at 14 doing anti-racism workshops, running press conferences. We had a terrific training. If any of you work with young people, you know they can do so much. Now, growing up, there was one Latino kid in our school, but we didn't even call it Latino back then, because back then, that was considered white, right? This is how much things have changed. She was like the Sicilian kids, maybe a little darker skin, but we still thought all of us as white. And then as a work person, I didn't meet somebody who was Jewish till I think my last year of college. I went to a Catholic university. I didn't get friends who were Muslim, probably into my 40s and 50s. What I'm trying to say is this is not an unusual story. Many of us have insular, segregated life. And there's always some element of diversity with which we've had very little contact. And I think only because I do diversity inclusion seminars do I have as much contact with different groups. I think if I was in some other field, I might be as limited as I was growing up. So let's get a little idea here where you are from. Could you let me know in the chat box so I can see the things that, where you come from, what part of the country? If you want to give me a title, that's fine too, but I like to see where folks are from. Okay, great. Rhode Island. Illinois, I thought we'd get some Illinois folks for sure. Texas, Oregon, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Detroit. Yes, West Virginia, wonderful. So your story may be very different than mine. Some of us had much more diverse experiences growing up. But in a longer seminar, I would actually encourage you to think about what was your racial conditioning or on other, whether it's gender, whether it's LGBT issues, whether it's disabilities. All of us were told things about different groups. And I want to give you just a little idea here from my friend. Oh, what's happening that it's not letting me move forward? Hello. Huh. Okay. There. Okay. Why do you think diverse staffing is so hard to accomplish? Again, if you would just throw it into the chat line, what are some of your first thoughts about what makes it difficult? Yes, implicit bias. Some of the lack of, Michelle says, lack of structural support. We hire people who seem like us. Absolutely. The pool of applicants can be very slow. Hey, listen, we know corporations and other folks are offering a whole lot more money than some of us in different libraries. We live in racial silos. Yes, all of those reasons. I want to keep thinking about this. And I just don't know why this isn't moving forward easily for me. I guess I have to click on it. And I want to give you just a time to also write in here, why do we want diverse staffing? Why are you interested that you would take out of the million of things, closets to clean, food to cook, bread to make, makes us stronger, represent our student body? Absolutely. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. More rounded, better ideas, different ideas. Megan says representation. Kristen says more innovation. Yes. Bringing those different perspectives, Margaret says, to really understand and respect each other. Mal, thank you. Absolutely true. Let me have you listen to a good friend of mine who is Ann Shimajima, a former librarian. She's, retired now, but just listen a little bit about her growing up.
When I was growing up in the 50s, we never saw Asian Americans on television or in movies or in magazines. Sometimes we would see people from Japan, but they seemed so foreign. I remember, I think I was in college when Asian Americans first started appearing on television commercials. If you saw this, you had to stop whatever you were doing and call everyone in the house to come and see. When I was in my 30s, I went to see a play. There were only 2 actors in it, 2 Japanese American men. I had never seen Asian Americans on stage before. And as I sat there watching them, I had this odd sensation that because I could see them on stage, I was here. It was that basic, that profound. Because they were there, I was here. And I realized for the first time how invisible I had always felt. If you grow up and you never see anyone who looks like you out in the popular culture, it's like looking into the mirror of life and there's no reflection.
To me, that is just so profound. You're looking into the mirror of life and there's no reflection. And that is true for those of you who are in colleges, your students, they look out. We always want to give people mirrors and windows. First, you need a mirror. You have to see yourself. Because they were there, she knew she was there too. She felt invisible. We want that for our students. We want it for our patrons, but I'll tell you something else. We want it for our co-workers too. They need to see themselves. They need to see their home cultures represented. So many of our coworkers feel like they're walking into an alien planet when they go to work. There's their home, and then there's a whole other world out there. How can we bring those worlds together? And that's partly why diverse representation becomes so important. So I want to ask you, let's get at it this way. Let's say there's a requirement for a job. You have to have 75 on a test, 2 years experience, and a BA. Now, the first candidate comes along and says, okay, it gets a 76 on the test, 2 years experience, and an MBA. Now, I know some of you are saying, I need to know more. Just play with me on this. It's going to make a point. Second candidate comes along, gets a 75, 9 years experience, and has a BA. The third person comes along with a 79 on the test, 2 years experience, and a BA. So I want to ask you this question. Who is the most qualified? If you would put in your chat, please. Who do you think is the best candidate? Number 1, 2, or 3? I've got 2s coming in. Can't tell, I know. 2s. There's a 1. All are 2s, yes. 3, 1, great. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a different question. Who is qualified for the job? Yes, all are qualified. You all got it. All are qualified. This is an important point. They all meet the requirements. So this is what I'm suggesting to you. A person is either qualified or they are not. Words such as more qualified, best, most qualified are really a matter of opinion. So tell me, what do you think the people who voted for candidate number 1, what do they value? What do they value? Got a 76, 2 years. Yeah, education, got that MBA there. What about the folks, candidate number 2? What are they valuing? Experience. A lot of you, of course, because you know, you got to learn on the job. A lot of you had chosen number 2. And number 3, those folks really value, yes, test scores. Absolutely. And I'm trying to say to you that a bias is just that simple. A bias is just a simple preference for one thing over another. Now, let me ask you something. What if those folks were from different racial groups? Who would you choose? And I'm getting all kinds of different answers here. Great. I'd still go with 2 because I go with experience. Right. Okay, beautiful. Here's what I want to suggest to you, and I have a model that I think will help you with this. Again, who's qualified? Every single one of them is qualified, right? So let me suggest this for you. This is a selection model that I have found very helpful. I hope it's helpful for you. We have a candidate pool. First, people have to go through the door of giving you what you need, the skills, the knowledge, the experience, the competencies to do the job well at the library, right? Then and only then, when they meet those requirements, do they walk through the next door, which is added value, additional benefits to the organization. And what I'm suggesting is that diverse representation comes in here. It's measured at this point, not in the need box, but in the value box, unless, of course, one of your needs is you need somebody who speaks Spanish. Then that diversity element could be part of the need box. But otherwise, the fact that somebody's Black, Latino, Asian, Indian, whatever, that could be part of the added value for the very reasons you mentioned about those diverse perspectives, about our students feeling like they're represented. So in that final selection, what we want to do is make sure that people know that everybody walking down our halls is qualified. Nobody got the job because, oh, he got that job because he's filling whatever diversity element. When affirmative action first started, unfortunately, some people either misused it or misunderstood it. and there was a lot of cynicism. Somebody got a job for this or that reason. No, when everybody shares this model, we know that anybody who comes in the door is qualified. Then when you get it to best or most, and I'm going to suggest you don't use those words, then it becomes our different bias, our different preference. Somebody loves if you do well on a test. Somebody else experiences what it's all about. Somebody else is like, hey, I got an MBA, they should have an MBA. So I'm just going to suggest we take out those words most and best and just say somebody qualified or not, and then look at the added value. Now, diversity, again, means any population you don't have. When I'm working with a bunch of nurses, they're often looking for male nurses. Maybe it's similar in terms of gender at your library. What is it you don't have that would add perspective, other community views? Now, again, nobody can represent their whole group. You have two different African-American applicants and they could bring wildly different experience. And yet their experience, because of our history, is probably going to be a little bit different than me, who would be identified as white. So you can, in the added value box, take all that into consideration. What's interesting to me is that there's a lot of, and if some of you are these wonderful research librarians, so please tell me if you have some statistics on libraries who are more diverse. But in schools, there's been a lot of measurement of when the staff diversifies, that the students have improved academic performance, higher standard test scores, better attendance, less suspension. For the high school, increased college aspirations, and beginning college, they want to stay, career aspirations. Why? Because they've got that mirror. They're saying, people, if she can do it, I can do it. Now, as a white person, I certainly hope that any student of color, patron of color, can take what I have to offer. I think I have a lot to offer. And the studies show that when you also have people who look like you, there's a whole other level of added value that comes along with that. So again, for all the reasons you mentioned earlier about multiple perspectives and productivity and innovation, having a diverse staff becomes so important. So in terms of, again, looking at these boxes, I am suggesting that being diverse is not a qualification for a job. Everyone has to go through that need box. And after somebody meets the qualifications, that diversity can be a huge added value. This is really important. I know friends of color who felt like they're looked at as an affirmative action hire, and that's a horrible way to be walking the halls, right? So please share this model with everybody so people know everybody went through that need door. So I call it the gotta haves and the wanna haves. Everybody had the gotta haves who's in our organization. Now, if you can look at every single point here, bias can still come in. So let us look at that a little bit, because how do you define the needs? How do you define the added values? That becomes crucial. You can't control what we've inherited. If we were to work together longer, I am a history buff. I would love to tell you the history of how we got purposely segregated from each other, how divide and conquer was used at every turn to keep us separate. So it is not your fault that you are struggling. Somebody had put in the chat box, racial silos. Those are on purpose. A lot of times we think, oh, people just like to be with their own kind. And of course, that's true to a degree. But believe me, I can even tell you in Chicago, there was a time Chicago wasn't segregated. And yet people purposely went knocking on people's doors, trying to get people of color out of neighborhoods they wanted to make all white. Having business owners refuse to sell somebody groceries if they were a person of color. Even stamps at a post office, yes, federal government was involved. They made some neighborhoods on purpose all white or all black to control voting blocks, to be able to control housing turnover. A lot of you know about the racial profiling and kind of redlining kind of things that happen. So I'm trying to say, if we had more time, I'd love to tell you more about that, but it's not your fault that you don't have as much connection with the very people you would like to work with. And we can do a lot about that right now. So first of all, in defining the needs box, we really want to watch for our bias. Are these the true requirements requirements. Like I said, if you are somebody with just values education and you've got your doctorate in this or that, you might have a bias that other people should have more degrees as well. You might have a bias because you have put in the work, and when you think of what you learned in library school and what you know now, it's like, it's got to be experience. You need, first of all, the biggest tip is that you've got to have multiple people on your committee to decide what that needs box is. What are the true requirements? We all are going to make some assumptions about what's needed. So if you're good at test taking, you're going to say, here's the test, but does that really test the person? So the antidote, again, is to have multiple sources who give their opinion on what that needs box should be. So I want you to ask some questions to yourself. If a candidate has not had extensive experience, remember, people have been locked out of fields. So I remember when they were first advertising for women in some manufacturing and engineering, and they would say 10 years experience. Well, women hadn't been in the field, so it knocked them out right away. And that's still true to some degree. So if somebody hasn't had extensive experience, it might be the result of past discrimination. So should you really rule out their ability to perform? Is there a similar kind of work history that experience could be applicable? Or with enough support, with enough mentoring, is this a position that could be filled by someone with different experience or approaches? And then you really need to look as a committee, which I hope is diverse, how is your language? Does your language give out any clues because there's a gender bias in it, or there's a white bias in it? Again, have multiple people look at it because they'll pick up something. It's not your fault. You have blinders on. You were separated from other people. You can't possibly know about every other culture. So provide a general enough description so candidates don't eliminate themselves because of some unnecessary, now I say unnecessary, narrow requirements. Are we defining our requirements in broad enough terms so that candidates don't self-select themselves out of the application process? Okay, so that's your first one. Expanding the candidate pool. We have to consciously manage our biases. We have to get out of our comfort zone. Again, if we were working together longer, I'd really have you look at what communities do you have contact with? Because a lot of us don't have contact with communities, and yet we expect people, especially if you're in the majority culture, like someone like me who's identified as white, we just think, hey, we put out the application. Let me tell you a quick story. Years ago, I used to write scripts for films, for industrials, for companies, corporations, nonprofits. And I was moving more into the diversity field, but this had been a great way for me to raise my kids. I was at home a lot. And I thought somebody else should know how to do this. Let me teach some people how to be script writers. So I advertised in the paper. And some people came and I taught the class, but there were no people of color. I never thought of my paper, I was living in the Twin Cities at the time. I never thought of my paper that had a white bias. And yet to many people of color that have lived in a whole different world, we have very different Americas because of how we've been treated over the years. They didn't necessarily think that was for them. Slowly, I began to make contact with people in Black churches. I got on the board of a Latina organization. Slowly, I was able to pass word to sometimes the grandmas. That was the best one. Grandmas, do you have any young people that are looking for work? And slowly, it took a few years, I started to have much more diverse classes because I looked for the candidate pools. You know that definition of insanity, keep doing the same thing and expect that it's going to change. It's not going to change. So we're going to consciously manage our bias. We're going to look at the connections we have. I know you think, hey, I'm competing with corporations and other people who can pay a lot of money to a candidate pool, but I'm in corporations all the time and there are people who want to get out. They hate the corporate grind. So don't defeat yourself before you begin. Some people want to be closer to home or have a little more regular hours. And there's some of you work as many hours as any other job. But so one suggestion again is your hiring committee needs to be diverse, get multiple points of view, maybe some people on your hiring committee who you wouldn't have thought of before, like outside your system that can help, right? Second suggestion is start telling everybody they are hiring ambassadors. They can be the people that go and talk to family members and colleagues and community leaders. You can make it a contest, make it fun in your library system. Who's made the most contact with people? Whatever you have to do. Meet with ethnic minority groups when you're at conferences and such, when we ever get back to seeing each other in person. This is being done during COVID-19 quarantines, but at some point when you have a chance, make a point to meet other people, because those people will know people who know people. Now I'm about to overwhelm you with ideas. You can't do it all. So you're going to have to rotate in your staff. And some people are really good at certain things like speaking in front of a group. Somebody else is really good at networking. But to allow a little time, I know you've got too much to do, but from your 5-year plan to your 1-year plan to your month-long plan, that every month you have something where you're making contacts with a larger community. So let's look at it this way. In terms of your communication, in terms of your PR, I really would like you to make sure that you're collecting data, stories from librarians about success stories, what it means that one of your students discovered this or that because you helped him or her find just the research that they needed. Just something about how great it is to do your job on your websites. When people speak, you've got to start, you know, I'm a professional storyteller, so I have a bias, but I teach nonprofits how to tell their story better. And believe me, stories stick. So you've got to start gathering those stories. So when you're out talking with people or just over, you know, the circulation desk, you can tell people what a difference libraries make. Advertise career and leadership opportunities and employee support systems in your area. Mention institutional values that promote diversity. Most colleagues of color have told me they first look to see that any organization has a diversity inclusion statement. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they believe it. Again, because of our radically different experiences of America, there's a mistrust factor that we just have to accept. It's not your fault. Don't feel guilty, but be responsible about it. Responsibility just means able to respond. And one of the ways we can be able to respond is we have a good diversity inclusion mission, and we keep talking about it. And then we tell stories about how we're fulfilling that mission. And again, placing advertisements in places you might not. Now, I know you don't all have a budget, but Black Enterprise, Black Resource Guide, Hispanic, American Visions, tips from search engines. Somebody's got to do a little bit of research, and you're so good at this. And what it means sometimes, you don't have the ad budget, but if you will write articles for some of these peer articles, and at the bottom, you've got a really good, don't just have your name and email, something that says your diversity statement, something that lets people know this might be an organization they should reach out to. You also want to look at and talk about your location. If you're in a more rural area, people of color need to know there's going to be access to some of the support they need. Or even if you're in a big city, talk about the communities of color that exist in your area. The ethnic kind of churches, stores, restaurants, hairstylists. You want to let people know they won't be alone. It's not easy to go somewhere and be the only. So please, I hope you won't ever think you're diverse because you have 1 or 2 folks. And the good thing is once you get 1 or 2 folks, they have communities and you keep reaching out, and it really multiplies. But especially if you have less diversity and you're trying, you've got to let people know that there's social clubs and service organizations and other professionals of color, for instance, that they can reach, and even medical, dental, legal services. Think about letting people know about those kind of things. Also, again, like I went to churches, that was when I was back in 30. Now I would also go to mosques and temples, ask if they have job announcements they make in their bulletins. I use church bulletins like crazy, and it didn't cost me anything. And that was super helpful. The other thing, of course, want to be doing is your younger people pipelines, and also your older folks. There are plenty of folks that are going to 2nd and 3rd careers by now who would like to volunteer. Even if somebody is volunteering right now, just again, your patrons looking around and seeing lots of different people. They don't necessarily know who's on staff, who's volunteering. It makes a difference. But in terms of younger people pipelines, partnering with high schools to have internship programs, get folks in your library working. Colleges, of course, some of you already have this, teacher training programs. It can be an internship for credit, but it also can be a lot of schools, the kids need community service, and this could be a great way for them to do it. Again, I know you have only so many resources, but if you rotate and just do a little bit at a time, it adds up to write to historically Black or predominant Latino or tribal colleges and get lists of students who are graduating in a particular field and just send them notes saying, you're welcome to come here. Do you have any questions? Can we help you in any way? Obviously, some of you can visit campuses. You're near different campuses, and you should be going to those different ethnic, racial support groups and talking about why being in a library is such a great place for them. Follow up with phone calls, emails, not just one-time things, but see if everything's about relationships, yes? So see if you can do that as well. The other point, obviously, is to reach out to other organizations. I was living in Chicago, now I'm down in Florida, but the Midwest Consortium of Latino Research helped me find somebody for a position once. There's national and state Black, Hispanic, Asian caucuses, and I reached out to those folks. Even statewide specific associations for different ethnic minority kind of groups. I kind of hate that word minority, but you know what I mean. Caucus group, Black coalitions of higher education, etc. In every ethnic group, there's associations. How can you be reaching out to them? And even, I want you to think outside of education, and what businesses could you reach out to? What corporations, military, government agencies? Again, I know it's a little overwhelming to think of all the places you could be scouting, but it does make a difference when you can do that. Sending out job announcements. I remember the Black Greek sororities helped me find somebody once. NAACP, they often have job listings. It doesn't necessarily have to mean you have money involved in all this. It is time. I'm not going to argue, but that's why if you divide it up between people and say, you know, everybody gives 2 hours a month towards scouting and enlarging our candidate pool. So again, don't become complacent after hiring a few ethnicities, racial groups you don't have right now. Again, if we work together, I define all that racial minority stuff. Our language is problematic, but you know what I mean. Recruitment is a year-long process. It's a forever process, but it really pays off. When a student comes in and sees somebody that looks like them, your coworker was thinking about taking a job and saw other folks that look like them, and even if it doesn't look like them, but it's another person of color, for instance, that sends a signal to people. It can just make a huge difference. So again, selection model, I'm suggesting you use the gotta haves, wanna haves, and everybody shares that, and you really define each door that people are gonna work through. You know, there was an MIT study where they sent out resumes. Some of you might know this. And everybody had the same experience and the same education level. The only difference is that some resumes had Black sounding names, Tyrone, Letitia, Rashid, Aisha, and other had more traditionally white sounding names, Tom, Greg, Mary, John. Well, what do you think happened? The white resumes received a call back for every 10 resumes that were sent out, and the Black sounding for every 15. So remember, the education and work experience were exactly the same. The Black named resumes received 50% less callback. So do you think people reading those resumes thought they were acting in any kind of prejudiced way? No. One of you said implicit bias. It's not conscious. All of us have biases. That doesn't make us a bad person. Again, if we had more time, we talk about our survival brain. It's a way we've survived as people, is that we divide the world into us and thems, and good guys and bad guys. Our brain is very dualistic unless we override it. And so what some folks are doing, if this fits for you, is that they're in their selection committee, they take off the names, you know, they take off anything that would say what diversity element this person belongs to, and they look at, do they have the gotta haves? Do they have what we need? So in your selection committee, you're just going to watch each other and you're all slip. So please be kind. My keynote talk is about, instead of being colorblind, being color brave, and that's important, and being color smart, and things we're learning today and other things we can learn make us color smart, and also being color kind. I want you to be kind to each other, because some of you are going to talk about, oh, this person fits really well. And you'll just gently say, now, what does that mean? Because a bias might be work, or we feel comfortable with this person. What does that mean? And again, those words like most qualified, best qualified. No, this person's qualified and they add this value. So just go easy on each other, but it is helpful. Now, you've got to communicate. There's still going to be misunderstanding. There's still going to be stereotypes that somebody got hired because of a particular background or racial or gender or whatever. I want to say you might need to advocate for that person, that you really let people know the contribution that this person can make. That's everybody's job. So I'm asking you, as you go out of here, if we had more time, we would talk to each other, but just how do you think you can impact the candidate pool? How can you ensure and communicate that the selection process is fair and inclusive? If you've got an idea of how you can impact, you feel like you have, I think it could really make a difference, that you feel like you are a personal hiring ambassador, even if you're not on the hiring committee, that you make a difference that way. Great. I'm seeing some of you say, yes, you can make a difference. Absolutely, you can. So let us talk a little bit about this whole idea of retention, because I hear from so many people, and it's so sad. They're like, we did all this work to get somebody here, and now they left, right? Without you meaning to. You could be in an environment that doesn't feel welcoming. In some cases, even feels hostile. And yet, when I talk with the people involved, and I go and do focus groups after there's been complaints and whatever, the nicest people with the best intentions. But because we've been separated from each other, because we've had such radically different experiences of this thing called America, we are going to step on each other's toes. We are not necessarily going to know what offends one another, but we can learn. That's the good part. We aren't going to let them separate us anymore. So here's really important things. When people come to work for you, is there some way they keep getting professional development? And I know some of you are like, we have too much professional development. So again, the person in charge of that, you want to work with them if you can, give them ideas in the gentlest, most wonderful way to make sure that they feel valuable to the person's time. But everybody wants to grow. I think it's in the Jewish faith where they say after over every blade of grass, there's a couple angels going, grow, grow. That's how much in the human spirit, we just want to grow. So people want to know they're going to get developed. For some people, not all, some are going to be really happy being hired for a job, doing that job. That's what they want to do. But some people want to know, is there anywhere they can go? Some people are even thinking about being directors or whatever of a library. So if that's true, is there a career path for people, and how do they get there, and do they know? One of the things I hear from a lot of people of color is it feels sometimes like there's all this information they can't quite get at. If any of you saw Saturday Night Live, they had one joke, I think Eddie Murphy was the host at the time, and he's at a party or some business meeting and everybody's talking nice, and then he and this other person of color he was with leave, and then all the white people start sharing information. So the joke was, sometimes people of color feel like white people have a way of sharing information and they just don't get it. So that's why if there is a career path, you want to not assume that people know where to go in the same way. And it's not to be patronizing towards people. It's just making sure that information is getting shared with everybody. Also, some people, not all, are looking for leadership opportunities, and that just might be heading up a project. I know a good friend of mine was so thrilled they were going to have a storytelling festival as part of the library's summer program. And she got put in charge of it. And she was great because she knew me and I know all these other storytellers, and I was able to help her, and I've run festivals. And she really blossomed. And I think people saw her a new way because she's very introverted, but boy, is she a good organizer, and she's a good communicator. So that's the other thing, is that sometimes we see people in one capacity. This goes for anybody you work with. And there's a part of them that needs to come out. So are there leadership? Also, are there support groups, especially if you're hiring people of color, but that can be for gender, or for disability, or any dimension of diversity. People need support. It doesn't mean they don't love you if they got to go be with their group. Sometimes we think that means they're isolating, or they don't like again. Isn't it odd? We got segregated, and because of it now we need to spend some time with our own group getting the support. So sometimes the only way through something is through it. So people need some time alone. And all the studies, again, I'm more familiar with the education studies, and some of you know books like Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? It shows that when anybody who's in a minority situation gets to be with people of their same group for strength, not to bitch and moan, but to offer one another support where they can just relax. They don't have to do the code switching people do when they have to go to the mainstream. They can be themselves. They can give each other resources and ideas. They do so much better in the mainstream. So it seems a little odd in some ways. We separate so we can be together, but that's kind of where we are in our development. And give people time to participate in those groups. Again, work out how that might be part of somebody's hours. And then you got to communicate to the rest of the staff. Well, why is she getting that, but I'm not getting that? So I know it's not as simple as it sounds. And on the ground, there's a lot of things to work out. But if you say you're valuing diversity and this person brings something nobody else can bring, then how are you going to support them? Just like I hope you support everybody. And that, of course, leads us into mentoring. Do you have some kind of formal mentoring program? And that could be a whole webinar in itself. But people need to know there are people they can go to. They need, if they get somebody and that's not quite the right fit, they need to have a way of saving face and switching to somebody who can. And if you don't have the resources in your library, can you help somebody get mentored by somebody outside of your library? And then, of course, in general, do you have a welcoming, inclusive environment? So I wanted to say just a couple of things about that. And again, these are whole classes because I know we worry about whether or not we might be unintentionally offending someone. And can I tell you something? We do. You are. Because we've been separated, because we have not known each other's lives, a lot of us have this idea, oh, slavery was horrible. Taking away people's land and pushing them onto reservation was horrible. Mexican-American War, people getting their lands taken over again. And then, well, things took a while and there was kind of Jim Crow in that, but then civil rights, we kind of do these giant hops in history. I know I did. And when you see that it's been continuous, that we've had, if you will, different Americas, that groups of people by every institution, education, justice, medical, are having different experiences. And yes, it's better. Thank God it's better. But we're so not done. I'll have you just look again. This is being taped during the COVID-19 crisis. Just something as simple is telling people when they go outside, when they go shopping, for instance, wear a mask. And some of you have heard, in particular, Black men, but people of color going, really? I should go into a store wearing a mask? I'm already know I'm perceived as dangerous. And now a cop stops me in the car and I've got a mask on. And do you see how even this, something that's, a bunch of us would just say that's a health precaution. Some people see it differently. So again, I don't want you to feel like you're walking through a minefield. You can get better and better and better at being culturally proficient and competent and all those good things. But it starts with getting out of denial. Again, color blindness. Well, I'm just a nice person. You are. You're a good person. Everybody raise your hand. You're a good person. I know there's, 200 good people on this call. And that's not enough for us to walk through what's actually happening. So to make a welcoming environment, I'm asking you to really think about the little ways colleagues might feel devalued. Or remember when Anne at the beginning said she felt invisible? Somehow they feel their ways don't count, their voice doesn't count. They're just not going to perform at their highest level. None of us do, right? So as our libraries become more diverse, we don't want our colleagues to feel like they have to totally leave their culture at home. We want them to feel like they count and they have that mirror to see themselves as, whereas of course libraries also provide the window for us to see the rest of the world. And I know some of you will say, well, just tell me what not to say, what not to do. And of course, dealing with human beings is never that simple. There was a Dutch psychologist, Gert Hofstede, and he made this huge database of all these different cultural dimensions. I don't remember how many, but he called it the Hofstede dimensions. And he measured the differences between different groups. Like, is your group more about we or I, collectivity or individuality? Does that group really handle ambiguity, or do they really want certainty? So he just went down all of these measurements. And first of all, there was no right or wrong to where any group landed on his scales. But the really important thing I think came out of it, he said that understanding where one culture or another falls on a scale can never predict where an individual is going to land. So this is so important. People are always part of their groups and different from their groups. All of us are, right? Think of your family. You're part of your family, but I'm sure you feel like you're different than a sister or brother. And we all want that. We want to belong, but we want to be seen as unique. So anybody that comes into your group, I don't want you to be like, oh, I've got the rule book. Here's how to treat First Nations, American Indians. Well, here's the rule book. We got 2 new folks who are African American, A, B, C, D. And yet within groups, there are tendencies because they've had a number of similar experiences. So there's no cultural rule book, sorry to tell you that, but groups do share similar characteristics. So you can start to know the tendencies in a group, and here's how. If you are getting some folks of different groups that you haven't had, take the time to learn as much as you can about the history, not the whole world, but their history, what you can learn about it. Share your story so it doesn't feel like they're a bug under a microscope. Oh, I have somebody who's Asian. Let me learn all about Japanese Americans. You tell me about Japanese Americans. Like Anne said, in her family, I mean, I think that's so funny and also heartbreaking to me that she would ever feel invisible, but the family would literally yell, Asian on TV. And so when everybody had one TV in the living room and everybody would come running. They had that common experience of feeling invisible in many ways. And yet I've met her family. They are so different from each other. So you need to get to know folks, not like a bug under a microscope. And yet if you learn something about the history, you do have a much better idea what offends people. I'll give you one quick story, and I'm going to watch our time here. I had a roommate who was Chinese American. And I once said to her, we were talking about a friend, John, who wanted to get a promotion. And I just said, John, I don't think he has a Chinaman's chance. He doesn't even know what that industry is about, whatever. You hear the word. I had heard that phrase when I was growing up, a Chinaman's chance, so often. I didn't even hear the word Chinaman. I work with a lot of young people who use the word Jew as a verb, and they don't even know it's about Jewish people. This is what I mean. We can be so oblivious to each other. Now, my roommate, Ivy, her face kind of fell and she goes, Sue, do you know what you just said? And I was like, no, but I think I'm about to learn. And luckily, she was so kind. She was color kind. And she explained to me some history I didn't know, which was out west when Chinese folks came in to work on the railroad and such, and cook and such. It wasn't they were better cooks or better cleaners or whatever. Those were the jobs that were open to them. Some of those, and it was men, they did not allow their wives, women to come over. There was a quota. Some of those men began to accumulate very cleverly with their little bit of money and began to rise in station. And just like many black men who were lynched were not just any black men, but men who were getting successful, these Chinese folks were harassed and killed in most horrible ways, running people off cliffs with horses, as the 1880s, with horses, running people over cliffs or hanging them from trees and shooting them. And these were Chinese lynchings, horrible part of history. And that's where the phrase came from. You don't have a Chinaman's chance, meaning you don't have a chance in hell. Did I know this? No. Ivy knew some of her history, and it hurt a little bit. Now, it hurt a little bit still because she still faces discrimination. I don't much like the stereotype, I'm Irish, of drinking, Irish little drinking leprechauns and such. But because I don't receive everyday discrimination as an Irish person, it doesn't hurt. I don't like it, it's annoying to me. But for Ivy, it had a little pang to her. And I never meant to cause her any pain, right? Now, after that, I'd be like, oh, Ivy, tell me every single thing about Chinese American. It's like, now it's my responsibility. People who have been on the outskirts in some way, outsiders in some ways in our society, don't give them the burden of educating you. Go educate yourself, right? So I started reading all kinds of Asian American history. And guess what? I saw that phrase, Chinaman's chance, several times come up. So you will start to know pretty soon things that offend people when you start to know their history. As you begin to develop relationships and you share your stories and it's mutual, you will hear more specific stories from somebody. I also ask all the people I work with, what makes you feel respected? What makes you feel valued? Is there anything that makes you feel disrespected? Again, I would ask it to everybody, not against singling people out. So we can create these welcoming environments for the people we live with. I feel like it makes just a huge difference if we avoid some of those pitfalls. But let me tell you, anytime you step in it, and you will, you can recover a relationship by just being humble, saying, I'm really sorry, and then letting them know you're going to take the responsibility to educate yourself better. You're not going to do it anymore, and you work hard not to. Something slip out, I know it, but you do your best. And I have seen relationships be stronger after a mistake has been made. So there's so much more. This could be a whole other seminar, and all those little micro inequities, all those ways we step on each other's toes. But I want to tell you, I want you to have some room at the end to hear from Sue Garrison again. But if there's some way I can help you, Susan@SusanO'Halloran.com. Very simple. If you would put in that memo line, if you'd like to be part of my mailing list, love to keep in touch with you. I send out blogs and things like that, if that's of interest to you. If you're interested in a live seminar, we can go into a lot of this stuff and much more. Or I have webinar series where it's usually 4 week. I find that's about the most people can take, sometimes 2, sometimes 4. If you're interested in any of that. I also want to tell you about my other site, Race Bridges Studio, where I have over 250 video stories from professional storytellers on race, on belonging, on identity. While you're watching some YouTube videos, watch some of those, because again, I find stories they're entertaining. They're the best way to educate ourselves in a really easy way. So go on over there, and there's some lesson plans, there's resources, there's discussion guides. All of that is free for you to use. So please stay in touch if there's any way I can help you. I so want to thank the Association of College and Research Libraries. I want to thank Access Services Interest Group. I mean, what a joy that you asked me to join you. And we never expected, this was planned months ago, that webinars would be the thing. And so keep on keeping on, a little bit at a time. You will make a huge difference. I promise you. Thanks again.
Sue, thank you so very much. Connie, do we have any particular questions in the chat box that Susan needs to answer? I know that people were asking about whether you would be able to provide any information to some of the studies that you cited.
I can tell you that the Brookings Institute 2017 for the students I know I'm talking to research librarians. I should have had all that ready to go. Connie, if you send me later, if there's any specific ones, I think that's one I mentioned. Hofstede's, you can just Google that and you can read his research. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I mentioned. You can let me know, and maybe there's a way we can let folks know, but I do know the difference it made for students to see more diverse staffing. And that again was from maintenance people, teachers, of course, administrators, board of education people. That was 2017 Brookings Institute, if I'm correct.
Okay, and Connie is sending in the chat box any specific questions that she was able to pull for today's session. So we should see those in just a moment.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for attending today's session. We have been including a little survey to today's presentation in your chat window, and if you could click on that and follow that link to answer the very brief survey that we have to help direct conversation for our fall forums, that would be really helpful, as well as indicating whether you would be interested in one of the positions with the group. Sue, this topic was really content filled, and there were a lot of good pieces of information floating back and forth between the participants in the chat box. So a lot of information sharing today.
Yeah, thank everybody. Just staying engaged, these things, I don't know about you, I'm a little zoomed out, and I know some of you are as well. So I thank you in this special time. And again, let me offer, as Elo did, just be safe, be healthy. What you do matters. I said librarians are my favorite participants to work with. What you do really changes lives.
Connie, did you want to run through a couple of those questions for Sue while we still have her online?
Yes, so one of the questions is, what do we do when we are charged on search committees to find diverse candidates, but we are also charged to recruit someone with the MLIS?
I know you have to dig so much deeper. Again, conferences are a great place to meet and expand. Sometimes people have been able to negotiate that, like what would be comparable. Because we've been segregated, because people have thought whole fields or avenues are not open to them, you just don't have as many people going through some of the same pathways as other people have. And so we live with our past discrimination gets us in trouble when we try, it feels fair. I'll give you just a simple example. I was just working with a school system that even registering for their school, you had to have 2 forms of identification. Well, I had to say, who does that leave out? Undocumented folks don't have the license, or sometimes a few families are living in one home, and so they don't have a utility bill. It's what we mean by white privilege, and I would love to teach your class in this so we're not scared of the word. It just means some of us have had certain advantages. We live in a certain world that we come up with things that just feel natural and absolutely fair, and then we don't realize to other folks it's not. So sometimes having to have certain credentials locks people out to begin with. And so some people are finding a way of bringing people on at, call it a different name, but help them get whatever credentials they have to get while they're there. We have to be creative. And if some of you are doing it, you know, are finding ways around, let's share those things. But I am finding people who find either comparable experience, or they come in at a different name and amount they're getting paid, but they work up to the right thing. Or at conferences, people are just charged with meeting a bunch of folks and reaching out to folks, all of those things. I don't know if that's helpful, but we have to be more creative for sure because of the past discrimination.
Connie, anything else for Sue?
No, I've been putting them in the question box to her. I think we are out of time.
Okay, and I just want to let everyone know that we will have this recording up on the ALA website in about 48 hours. For those of you renewing your ALA membership, we encourage you to select Access Services Interest Group as a community member because when the interest group applies to renew its status with ACRL, ACRL considers the number of members in the interest group when making its decision to continue a group. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Sue, for your time. We hope we can have
Thank
you
you,
again.
everybody who made it possible. There are a bunch of people behind the scene that made this possible, so thank you to them too.
Wonderful topic and so relevant in this time. Stay well.
Thank you. Stay well, everyone.